Hey everybody, welcome to Skookum Scarp Sanctuary. I'm here at the beautiful cabin. It's gray skies, as is pretty normal for out here at this time of year. But I just wanted to create a video today to have a discussion about spring growth going on in the forest right now as far as what's edible. One of the main questions that you always hear, or I guess protests that you always hear from skeptics about Sasquatch, is there isn't enough food for them to eat. In my experience, people in general, including in the wildlife community, well, maybe not in the wildlife community specifically, but certainly in the natural sciences, there's not a very big focus on edible plants and kind of the crossover between what's edible for humans and what's edible strictly for wildlife. That's kind of more of a specialty area, I would say, when you're really getting into, the biochemical reactions that are going on as far as which species can tolerate what for what reason. And, that's going to change even through specific, through the different seasons. So one of the things that we look at out here is we have a really big focus on Sasquatch habitat and what we think they like to eat and how that affects their behavior, their migrations, all of those related issues. And one of the things that I personally believe that I feel I'm observing is that they keep really accurate deer counts. They stay in the uplands. They know in each little valley, each draw, it, about how much, if not precisely, how many deer are there at any given time. And they manage these deer herds over time in the same sort of way that we do, that we have state laws that say here's when you can hunt deer, and we do all of that with our different any kind of animals that we take. We say, okay, you can only take crab at this time of this size, etc. That they have that same sort of process. They know exactly what they're doing when they come down and hunt these deers. So that's one of the concepts. The other one is I think that they utilize deer with current land use patterns as far as the way Americans use the land these days, how we manage our natural resources, that the Sasquatch use the deer essentially as a protein escalator going into the uplands. So the Sasquatch, because of the way that their body works, the way that they're built, they've basically conquered the really steep uplands, and that's where their primary areas for hiding and everything. That's kind of their start point, and then from there they can radiate out and do what they want. But it would make sense for a Sasquatch if you have a herbivore like deer that can, they just a few deer can decimate foliage in an area in no time flat. If you're a large creature that really needs its calories and has these special conditions of it has to stay hidden even more so than other creatures, you're going to want to protect all of your herbaceous growth in your area. And so it would make sense that you would kind of want to keep deer out eating our food, which is all of the growth that we have down here that we don't manage, because there's just not enough time for us to intensely manage forests like that. And so we have all this overgrowth that happens. Whether you're talking about Himalayan blackberries, native species that dominate like salmonberry, their strategy is let's keep the deer down there eating where we can't go for the most part, and then when the deer make it up to the interface between their kind of wildlands and where we dominate, that's when they can take the deer and they get that protein, and they're taking it to the uplands from there. So that's one concept. But then there's this other related issue, which is that Sasquatch, I think oftentimes people kind of just view them as maybe like a wild man that bounces around where it can get food here and there. It's mostly kind of, I don't know, there's not a lot of discussion about specific food patterns and things like that in the Sasquatch community. And one of the concepts I'd really like to promote is the idea that these things have to plot out in their mind, and they got to know. exactly. They're so big they don't have a big margin for error. And so therefore they've got to kind of have a river of food to get to those deer sources, for instance. So I believe that they essentially, and if you go to our Patreon, you can read, I wrote a pretty decent sized article about it. I call them mega generalists. Sasquatch have the innate abilities to forage like a bear, but they have the smarts of primitive humans or something along those lines. They have the smarts to actually be able to map out these highways of food and to keep track of, say, things like deer, and they're very aware of seasonality of all the different plants. They're just, they have the intelligence of primitive humans basically, and the tactical abilities to actually exploit that. And so this is kind of one of the things, is that they've got to know when they're going into an area that they want to hunt deer, they got to know exactly how much is going to be around for them to be grabbing, like, "Arr, arr, arr," because that's what they're doing to keep moving through the woods. They've got to know if it's tips of fir trees that they can eat, if it's new shoots of salmon berries, if it's the miner's lettuce, if it's oxalis. They've got to know, have a pretty good idea of what they can eat along the way before they get into their spot and then do their usual grab the deer, cut its head, rip its head off and do their thing. And so then we kind of get into other issues with that as well. Just as far as whether or not they also use some of these plants for medicinal purposes. There's the concept of geophagy, which is that they could be coming to certain areas to eat clays, which we know a lot of primates do, in order to kind of increase what they can consume overall. So, for instance, if some food source might make their belly kind of upset at a certain time of year because the berries have been there and they're kind of rancid, it would make sense that, okay, well, they're eating some kind of clay to kind of, say, wash it all down. And we know that other creatures do that, and that other creatures will use certain plants in medicinal ways. And so these are all concepts that we're looking at out here, and I'm gonna shoot a little bit of video into the woods to show some of the things that are happening in the woods right now that would allow them to travel, because like I say, every season there's something different that's edible on the ground, in the trees, that these things can be consuming. And once you have a better understanding of that, and you start seeing these patterns of how they're exploiting their food sources, I guess Sasquatch just becomes a lot more understandable, maybe even believable. Okay. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you out in the woods.